Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's Chief Learning Officer Magazine webinar. My name is Alec, and I'll be here in the background to help answer any of your general or technical questions that you have. But, as usual, before we get started, I'd like to cover a couple things you need to know about the session today. There's no dial-in number for attendees. All audio will be streamed through your computer speakers or headphones, so please adjust your volume there accordingly. You can submit questions or any technical issues you may encounter by clicking on the Q&A icon located on the right-hand side of your screen, labeled here with this top arrow. If it's a content-related question, it may be pulled during the Q&A session if time allows, and if it's a technical question, I'll have an answer for you that will appear on your screen shortly after you submit. You can follow along today by clicking on the handouts icon located on the right-hand side of your screen, labeled here with this bottom arrow. You can download a PDF for today's webinar to follow along with us during the presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded. You're going to receive a link to the recording and a follow-up email. In that same follow-up email, you're going to have a link to the PDF and your HRCI and SHRM certification information, so please keep your eyes open for that. That will come from an email called HCM Events. All right, so it's our pleasure to have with us Casey Walters, the Vice President of Strategic Programs at Northern Trust. She has 18 years of experience in the fields of learning, organizational development, and knowledge management, and Walters leads a small global team and is responsible for building a global corporate university to organize all learning across Northern Trust, along with managing the global onboarding strategy, leading client education efforts for top-tier clients, embedding industry knowledge across the organization, and creating global mentoring and career development programs. So like I said, it's our pleasure to have Casey with us. So Casey, let's get started.
All right, thank you so much, Alec, for that introduction. And I am thrilled to be with you today to talk about what I consider to be a fairly complex topic, deciding what belongs in our global learning and development strategy, kind of juggling all the needs that come at us from all directions, and determining what our priorities are. There are so many factors and many stakeholders to keep involved to kind of help us determine what we own and maybe what we don't own as a global L&D organization, what we support and what we don't support. And then how do we ensure that our programs and services are aligned and relevant to the business and our employees? I mean, many of us have extremely limited resources, so making thoughtful decisions about what we focus our efforts on becomes extremely important as we plan our strategies. So as promised, just briefly here, I hope you all can take away maybe one or two ideas as it relates to these kind of four key areas. One is balancing the needs of a matrixed organization. And I'm sure a lot of us, whether we work globally or nationally, we work in some type of matrixed organization. Also, I'm going to share some of the models we're using, as well as the stakeholders that we keep involved in governing our solutions, and how our own model, our operating model, has kind of evolved over time to support this matrixed environment. And then finally, how we set priorities and even manage projects closely to ensure that we're staying in scope. And those are programs that might be on our annual plans, but also those that kind of come at us during the course of the year that are very much unplanned. And I know a lot of us have that experience. So just to set a little bit of context as to why I'm talking about this particular topic. So Northern Trust is a global organization with about 18,000 employees. So we're not mega huge, but we're not small either. And our demographic, and I'm sure much of you can relate to this, is shifting quite a bit as well. So the way that we develop and deliver training is changing. We are now over 50% of our population is under the age of 35. And honestly, that is ticking up almost on a daily basis. We are a matrix organization, as I mentioned. There are needs for the global enterprise. Each of our business units have needs, and then each of our regions are actually on an office location basis have needs. And sometimes these three are not always in harmony. I wish they were, but sometimes the needs actually either conflict with one another, or the timing or the emphasis of the needs don't always align. And then kind of building on this complexity, we are also a very decentralized learning organization. So we have a global or enterprise learning and development organization within human resources, and that's the team. of which I am a part. And then we also have learning teams that are really embedded in the business. So each business unit has its own team or own dedicated learning professionals, sometimes full-time, sometimes part-time, but their scope is really to look at more of the functional and the technical training that the business needs, that an employee needs to really do their job. So I'm going to talk a lot about that model a little bit later in the conversation. But if Northern Trust is a very complex organization, like I'm sure many of yours are, and I'll tell you, if I've learned nothing else, it's this, and that is global is hard, period. Early part of my career, I worked in a national organization for a number of years, and that was a wonderful experience. It certainly had its nuances, but global is much harder. I kind of keep this thought in mind to really keep me on my mission of making things simpler. The organization is very complex, as you see. It's complex on the back end. It's matrixed in terms of how we serve our employees, how we serve our clients. Then we have a decentralized learning organization. So it's really my mission to try to take the complexity of our organization and our structure and try to make it simple as possible. But why is global so hard? And I'm sure you all have your lists, and I'd love to see your lists. But these are a few things that really bubble up to my mind almost on a daily basis when I think about how can we present solutions and services that are really going to make a difference to our employees and ultimately our clients. I mean, the first thing is time zones. I mean, obviously, most of us, not all of us, just sprang forward over the weekend. We lost an hour of sleep. Although if you're in Arizona, I'm sure you're doing a happy dance because most of you don't change time. But, Europe changes time, but not at the same day. And if you work with places like Singapore and India, you know that they don't change time at all. So I actually have a table on my office wall to remind myself when the time differences are and how they change with our time change, because working across these time zones and keeping this in mind is very difficult. I'm not sure if any of you have ever had a meeting with someone in Singapore, but someone is losing out. I mean, either you're up before the sun or you're up way past your bedtime when you'd prefer maybe not to be on a conference call. But languages, we are fortunate at Northern Trust that we don't have to translate our materials and our courses. I know a lot of you probably do. And so that is certainly added complexity. And I'll tell you, I never realized how many cliches and slang that I use until I started to work for a global organization. So it's something that I just try to keep in mind as well. Certainly there are cultural differences, religious differences, holidays that are celebrated. I know the Philippines, at least we acknowledge 19 holidays in the Philippines. So that's another list that I have on my office wall in terms of when we are scheduling and pushing things out. Business models might be different, certainly values and work shifts. We have many team members that are in Bangalore, India, and those who work in Europe as well, and some work on their own shift, some work on US shifts. So I always have to think about when I start a meeting with good morning, is it really morning? And I need to be cognizant that it may not be morning where all the attendees might be calling in from. Certainly based on our offices, there are differences in the clientele that we serve, policies, legislation. These can be labor or benefits, regulations. Being in a financial services industry, we are very highly regulated, and those regulations vary quite a bit across the globe. Transportation is something. I don't know if any of you have ever had to deal with customs in other countries, shipping complications, and even weather, everything from monsoons to even nor'easters that we have. And so those of you in the Northeast, I hope you're hanging tight. I saw that there was 2 feet, I think, in Boston, and I'm actually trying to travel there on Monday. So hopefully I will make it. But also career desires. I think what we have noticed is that the desire to move up and even the pace at which that might happen in someone's career can vary across regions as well. So with all of these complexities, and again, I'm sure there are more and you might have more on your list, why should we have a global learning and development organization? I mean, why should we have global programming at all? And honestly, there are again, probably many more reasons than I've articulated here, but there still is a reason to have consistent organization-wide messaging. And we actually lean on the business quite a bit to help us determine when something should be consistent in terms of content or experience, and when maybe does it not have to be so consistent? When can it be tailored or customized to a particular audience? We need to reinforce our company culture and values across the company to all employees. We try to ensure a certain level of quality in the programs that we offer, although I will tell you, with the shift in channels, with the move to more micro and mobile and YouTube and social, our quality standards have shifted a little bit to keep up with those channels. But we still deliver instructor-led training. And so I know a lot of you might have read similar articles about the classroom is dead and everything's moving online. I will tell you at Northern Trust, the classroom is not dead for us. Yes, we try to mix in all of those multiple modalities, but we really try to still deliver instructor-led training where it makes sense. And we make very thoughtful decisions about that. We need a consistent baseline of skills. So we are a service organization. We pride ourselves on our ability to deliver very high client service. And so there's a baseline of skills that's needed in anybody, whether you're client facing or whether you're internally facing. And so that's a reason to have global programming. And then the last two are kind of from a selfish perspective, honestly, within the learning and development organization. We want to try to smooth out the have and the have-nots. We want to achieve a consistent level of satisfaction and access to learning, which is, again, where those other modalities help us out quite a bit. Because oftentimes what happens is, within our headquarters here in Chicago, Illinois, we may have access to certain leaders or certain experiences or forums that might not be the same in our Luxembourg office that's a bit smaller, although growing. And so we're trying to kind of smooth out the have and the have-nots. And then our final point here is, honestly, again, with limited resources, we want to efficiently manage and maintain content the best way that we can. We want to ensure that there are limited duplications in programs, and we want to make sure that when we have changes that we're hopefully making those one place and not 5 different places. So they're very compelling reasons, as to why we should have global programs. But honestly, how do you strike the right balance? And again, in our matrixed environment, it's really the global enterprise, the regions, and the business units. How do we strike the right balance? Because there is a tension here a bit between these three, and with very separate needs and very different desires. And the key is knowing when to apply global programs versus regional or business programs, and when consistency matters and when it doesn't. And honestly, that question has become very central in our needs analysis processes. So we get needs from all different directions, as I'm sure many of you do. We get needs from the business directly, certainly from our leaders, from our HR business partners, from our employees directly, from our people managers directly. And so other than trying to uncover, what the true need is, and can learning be one of those solutions, and do we have the resources and the budget? But we also ask the question, does it need to be global? Or can it be local? Is this a one-off, or is this something that could be maybe more institutionalized? And that's really been a key part that's been added to our needs analysis process. So in considering all of this, again, the key for us has been, what can the global learning and development team do? And again, maybe what can we not do? So this is fairly hot off the press. And I guess there's one of those cliches that I use again. But this is something that we've been trying to apply to help us determine what is it that the global organization should own. And I'm a big fan of 4-quadrant models. I find them fairly simple to use and apply. So when we started to dig into our needs analysis, what we found was, and I've mentioned this word consistency quite a bit, but what we found was what has to be consistent and to the degree of that, and what has to be the most efficient or the most scalable in terms of what we deliver. So we've kind of come up with this 4-quadrant model to help us determine what we should own. So what you'll see, obviously, in the top right-hand corner, these will be the programs that need the highest consistency in terms of content and experience and the highest scale, meaning pretty much everyone needs them in the organization or a very large population needs them in the organization. And if we move kind of diagonally down to the lower left corner, this is the exact opposite of that, right? So it's what's the lowest consistency, meaning it's very custom, it's very, very tailored to a process or a system or a population. And then what needs maybe more either high touch or more flexible delivery. A lot of our functional training programs are still delivered instructor-led because the topics are extremely complex. So we have a lot of subject matter experts who are also trainers in that space, and so they do a lot of high-touch training. But back across the top, so we also have programs that need to be highly consistent, again, in terms of the content and experience, but we're willing to maybe sacrifice some of the scale just a little bit because, again, we want this to be a high-touch experience, or we need to have a very flexible model in the way that we're delivering that to be able to reach people on the ground across the globe. And then finally, looking at quadrant 4 here on the lower left, we do have programs that maybe aren't quite as consistent because they're very personal or individualized, but we need to scale them. And therefore, these things are kind of owned by smaller teams, but they have the support of the global team in terms of channels that we use or templates that we might provide. And it's also important to say here, the way that we achieve scale, which I'm sure many of you do as well, we do rely very heavily on self-paced learning or even live virtual learning so that someone may not need to actually attend a classroom, but try to get, a personalized experience as best as we can. So kind of we've been looking at this quadrant model here, and we've applied it to the things that we deliver. And again, this is a little bit of a work in progress, but this is how we've applied the model. And I'm going to kind of dive into some specific examples here after this slide. So what we've decided that must be managed and delivered by the global L&D department in human resources are the things that you see listed here in quadrant 1. So we worked very hard to roll out a virtual corporate university, which is supported by a new learning management system, and that is highly consistent. It's used by everybody who manages a learning program, whether they're part of HR or not. We believe very strongly that management and leadership must be consistent across the organization, as well as everybody needs to know our technology in terms of Skype and Outlook and SharePoint and the like. And so those things don't really vary. And we also have some enterprise compliance training, as I'm sure a lot of you do, that every employee needs to take. So these are the things that we as a global team must own. And if we move across the top, there are still areas where we want consistency. Again, we want that baseline of experience for our new hires, for our people in client service roles and sales roles, or those people who we tap on the shoulder to be a part of our high potential programs. But they don't scale as much because there needs to be some flexibility in terms of how that's being delivered or how the skills are applied to a particular product or service or business unit. And so we want to help manage the content from a high level perspective, but the business units and the regions help us kind of deliver on these programs as there are nuances based upon what business that you're in. And then again, kind of moving counterclockwise here to quadrant 3, these are all the job-specific skills and processes and systems. And again, I mentioned local regulations. They're very specific based upon business or even product or country. And so these are the areas where the global team does not get involved, quite frankly, at all. These are solely managed and delivered by the teams within the business units. And again, most of the time, those are subject matter experts. They're not necessarily professional learning folks, although they can be with deep expertise. And then finally, moving to the final quadrant here, these are the programs that they must scale. We want to provide mentoring and career development and even educational assistance opportunities to everybody. But things vary. I mean, this varies on an individual basis. So the way we've achieved scale is, again, through templates and through playbooks to help people implement things. But the ownership of implementing programs and processes really does rely on people closer on the ground, be it in the region or be it with a business or even with people managers directly, certainly work with their employees on managing their careers. So just real briefly, I'm going to dive into kind of a more specific example of each. So our best example, I would say, of high consistency and high scale is our virtual corporate university, Northern Trust University. And this is supported by our learning management system. And it is very much a part of our governance across all those learning teams, the decentralized teams that I mentioned, is to have one platform, to have one place for employees to go. So even though we're decentralized, we do not have 5 different LMSs. We have one, and we've made that commitment. And this certainly helps us scale the delivery and even some of the operational processes we have behind the scenes. We have one browsing structure, and that took some time to agree upon, but just what do we call certain things, and can we call them the same thing? We have one metadata list and one way to report metrics, and we have one L1 survey, for example, and that's the same for every program, regardless of what learning team owns and produces and delivers that program. So this is actually the ultimate in employee experience and consistency and scale across the organization. And we've actually made a pretty big commitment to have it be extremely consistent across the organization. So moving into that quadrant 2, where we want consistency, we want our new hires to have a great experience. This is an area, I will tell you, where we really had the haves and the have-nots. I mean, again, people who joined major hubs had a wonderful experience. They had a very high-touch welcome experience. But those who maybe joined some of our smaller offices in the United States or even across the globe, they were shown their desk and hopefully they had a computer to start the day. So we're really trying to make this a consistent experience, but yet we recognize there are nuances within the business and even within the regions that will vary. So not every new hire is going to be in the same building and know exactly where to go to the bathroom. And there might be certain regulatory requirements that are different if you work in our Bangalore office versus if you work in our Chicago office. So we've created a virtual welcome center for all new hires, regardless of the location. So this is where, again, we get consistency and scale. And we've designed this to be in a 30, 60, 90-day format. It's a roadmap for all new hires to follow, and they get access to the same content, the same videos, the same welcome messages, no matter where they are joining from. But underneath this, our business units actually have been building more specific training that's leveraging a shared visual design that we've all agreed to. So our business units have created very specific training to people joining our derivatives group, for example, or our investments group. And so that's very specific to them, but it looks and feels the same, and it's all accessible from the single location. And our regions have also created toolkits that have the same design for that consistency experience, but yet the content varies, depending on what office you have joined us in. But again, this was trying to even the playing field to create that consistent experience, but allow for any nuances or any differences that might exist within the businesses or the regions. And moving into that quadrant 3, where really the business owns the training, the global organization does not get involved. But what we have done is, and what I kind of gave a nod to in the first example, is we have one navigational structure. So we have one way to browse for training. But underneath that, if I click on banking, I'm going to get very specific banking training or very specific accounting training. And these courses are not something that the global team develops, but the business units develop. But again, it's a nice experience for the employees in that they can come to one place to be able to access those. And then finally, the fourth quadrant here. So again, this is things that are very specific even to individuals, but we've helped them, where the global team has gotten involved is that we've helped them scale. So again, through Northern Trust University, they are able to come in and access resources and tools and forms and templates to help people manage their own career. But oftentimes we'll find that the regional teams or even business units will run their own sessions. They'll facilitate forums to talk about career. They'll hold career fairs. These are things that the global team does not get involved in, but we provide as much as we can in terms of tools and playbooks to help enable these business units and the regions to manage some of these things. And something we're actually doing that's very new, it's rolling out in a couple of months, is a bit more of a focus on mentoring. So we have strong desires for people to find a mentor within the organization to help people manage their career and find their path and manage their career map. And so we simply do not have the resources to manually match people in that program. But what we are doing is, again, providing training for how to be a great mentor, what a good learner or mentee looks like. And then we have a playbook that we're developing to help business units kind of grab and go and be able to assign a coordinator and develop their own processes and run their own mentoring program. And that's actually working quite well. We're piloting that now, and we hope to roll that out to the organization. But again, mentoring seems to be a very personal activity, a very organic activity. So it's, how can we scale that without having us run every single mentoring program across the company? So that's a little bit about how we're trying to plot what it is we own as a global organization. So I'm going to shift a little bit and talk about how do we govern these programs that we now own. And I mentioned that we are a decentralized learning team. So on this diagram, what you'll see is, on the left, this is the global enterprise team within HR. We certainly have a discrete list of programs and processes that we manage. And the business unit learning teams have the same. And they usually are more on the product side, the service side, the compliance regulations, things that are very specific to jobs. But what's in the middle and where we've started to govern as a decentralized learning team is what's common. And right now, what's common is Northern Trust University. What's common is the infrastructure, if you will, that supports all of the learning programs that we do. And this is where we have started in terms of our governance process. So what I'm going to show you now is our governance model. This is how we govern learning and development across the enterprise. And you'll see it's very much aligned to that diagram that I just showed on the previous slide. So if I look at the enterprise learning and development team, which is the global team in HR, we have multiple different advisory councils. And there is a reason for this. Because we develop global programs, we want to stay as closely connected to the business as possible. So we do have an executive council, and I'm sure many of you have a steering council of some form or another, an advisory council. This is comprised of senior leadership, and they really direct at the highest level what our priorities are. They're there to represent the future organizational skills and needs that might be across Northern Trust. And they do provide some level of approval for the staffing and the funding that we might be asking for the year. But what we also do is on some of our bigger programs, on some of our more flagship type programs, like management development, like career development, we have specific advisory councils for those programs. And these are comprised, it's a little bit more cross-functional. So regional and business leaders, in which case most of them act as our sponsor or sponsor team. And I will say what I have learned across my career is that if you are going to have a global program that touches, tens or hundreds of thousands of people, it's important to have more than one sponsor. One sponsor does not really represent the entire organization. So we have found that these advisory council teams can serve pretty good as a sponsor council. They can help with communications. They can help remove barriers. They can help resolve conflicts. And that's really how we use them as a sponsor team. They help us with the scope and the learning objectives. Hopefully those tie back to business metrics. That's what we try to ensure. They'll help us with the approach. They help us identify pilot participants, and they absolutely debrief, how these things are going and decide how do these things become institutionalized within the organization as well. And then kind of floating to the bottom, our business unit learning teams have very similar councils as well. And those are usually composed of business leaders within that business unit, of course, and they act as sponsors and they help with their priorities and define scope and objectives and approach similarly to how we run our global programs. But the difference here is that we have this layer in the middle that's common. And this is where leaders from the enterprise learning and development team and leaders from the business unit learning teams come together, and we have formed a Learning Leaders Council. And it's small to start, although I hope it grows. And again, this is a bit of a work in progress. But the point of this team is to really harmonize all these inputs that we have. So the enterprise team is collecting needs and trying to verify our solutions on a global basis, while the business unit teams are doing that, for their business unit priorities. So how do we bring these things together? So we share strategic learning objectives. We try to coordinate more across the teams so that we're not building 5 different management development programs, that we have a global management program. And then if there are detailed management needs that are very specific to the business, that those things are kind of added on to the global program and managed by the business units. We believe firmly in doing RACI charts. I don't know how many of you do that for your programs, but I'm telling you, they've been a lifesaver. Understanding who is truly responsible for the work, who must be consulted, who's got to be asked for their opinion, and who just needs to know about what you're doing. This is something that we do for every program that we roll out. And then we've talked a lot about quality standards and Northern Trust University as a platform. This is what's discussed at the Learning Leaders Council. So it's really these layers are what help govern our programs. And again, it might look a little complex, but it keeps everybody tied to the business. And that common layer really keeps learning leaders tied together, so that we're trying to reduce confusion for our employees. Because as you can imagine, there's a lot of training happening around the organization that's not all owned by one team. And we try to reduce cost whenever we can. Again, we don't need 5 different management programs. So can we agree to one and think about how that could be built? So this governance model has really helped us stay aligned to one another, as well as to kind of what our business goals are as well. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of how we have evolved as the enterprise learning and development team in HR, how the global team has evolved, because it has been a journey for us. And maybe some of you have been on the same journey and maybe tried different models as well. But I feel like we've swung the pendulum in a couple of different directions, and we've kind of landed in the middle as something that has worked for us. So because we were trying to balance businesses and regions and global, we kind of started off in more of a regional model. So we had 3 distinct teams, in North America and Europe and APAC. We did run separate programs because we felt the regions had different needs. I'm not saying there was no coordination, but the coordination could have been a little bit better across those as well. But it was very high touch with the business. So very aligned to the regional leadership and really responding to those needs quite well. But because it was so disparate and because it wasn't connected as best as it could be, we kind of then swung the pendulum to be a global team. So we were one team. We did have some staff sitting in the regions, but we were only focused on global programs. We were highly consistent. Everything was the same that we pushed out, but I will be honest, we lost a little bit of connection to the business, because when you make things so global, sometimes they meet most of the needs, but they don't meet all of the needs that the business has. And again, with the kind of that 3-legged stool between region, business, and global, there are going to be some nuances that, might need to be met a different way. So finally, I think what we've done is we've kind of swung the pendulum back into the middle, and we have more of a hybrid structure on the learning and development organization. So we do focus on global programs. As I showed on the 4 quadrants, we do tend to stay at the top 2 quadrants where global messaging and consistent messaging and experiences are needed. But what we've done is we've added a regional consulting and delivery layer to help us stay connected to the business. We focus a lot on coordinating feedback between those regional consultants and the global program managers. And I think this has actually enabled us to meet the needs while keeping the scale at the same time. We're kind of in the middle of operationalizing this model a bit better, but so far I would say the results have been quite good. So just a little bit more detail on this. Again, very intentionally, we decided in our hybrid model what should be global and what should be regional. And when we look at the client-facing half of our learning and development team, what you'll see is consulting and needs analysis is both. It's both global and regional, and that's definitely on purpose. We hear needs from global leaders, but we also hear needs from, regional people managers, and we kind of take all of these into a funnel, and we talk about, how they can shape our programs together. Globally, we do manage curricula and we do manage development programs, as I mentioned, with mentoring and career development. We curate content globally. That's something that we do that's kind of been a better service, I will tell you, for our employees who are looking for information. I mean, our search tool is wonderful, but I still think people like curated content. It just drives them right to the best resources, if you will, for them to access. I mentioned that our NTU, kind of our Northern Trust University solutions and the administration of that platform is global, as well as we pride ourselves on having standards and templates around internal communications. But what's done on the regional side, outside of consulting and needs analysis, is they absolutely have the liberty to tailor the curriculum and the programs that we manage globally. And hopefully they're providing the global managers feedback on if something needs to be changed across the board. They're the ones on the ground delivering and facilitating the programs, but we also have our marketing and communications fairly well tailored to the regions, but it looks the same. So we have the same standards and templates that we drive from a global perspective. And kind of on the back of the house, if you will, the operations side, again, our governance model is global. We plan our budget and we staff our resources globally. We try to have similar data and metrics. We coordinate vendors, and we actually are very fortunate to manage some grants that come our way as well. That's really what global operations look like. But on the ground, again, in the regions, things like classroom logistics and setting up courses and administering them, evaluations and surveys, these are the things that are very unique to the programs and can be unique to the regions. And so we've been fairly intentional on how we've divided these things. And as I mentioned, we're still in the process of operationalizing this a bit, but so far it does seem to be working quite well. And so just a bit of a nod to what I was mentioning before. So how this model works is we do have global program managers. I mean, they're the ones that manage the content, the curricula, they're training trainers, they're creating tools, templates, playbooks, they're identifying the right channels for this to come through as well. But we work with our regional delivery team in that, they're tailoring this. They might be deciding when a program should be emphasized or communicated or timed, and that might vary across regions. So for example, I mean, in Bangalore, we really need to prioritize a new to workforce program where we might be focusing on interpersonal communications or even dress code policies. But yet at our headquarters in Chicago, those programs aren't needed quite as much. Now they're offered, they're available for someone to take, but that's just not something that we're going to communicate outward as being a huge need within the headquarters office. But the regional people also provide us tons of feedback. So if they are tailoring it, how are they tailoring it? And maybe that would work across the globe. They also provide success stories and metrics, which is something that we really appreciate as well. But when we work with the business unit learning teams, they kind of take our content, as I mentioned, but if they need to go deeper, so for the new hire experience, again, they need to understand what the company is and what our history is and what our culture is. But if they need to understand what the business unit does, what a specific accountant job is, they take it to a deeper level. They also provide application opportunities. So we do provide a global client service skills program, but we provide them a boot camp in the box. So they can take that and they can, kind of rationalize that and apply their own products and services and have those skills be applied in context as it matters to the business unit itself. And again, they are also responsible for providing feedback, stories, and metrics. So this really works together as a loop in terms of feedback and tailoring and application. But again, we're trying to manage consistency as much as we can, but we do recognize timing and application might be different across the regions and the business units. So how is this new model working? I said it is working pretty well, and it is. There's great benefits to this model. I mean, for us, it's increased our responsiveness. Being completely global with not a lot of regional presence kind of hampered that a little bit. So it's been able to increase our responsiveness. We've definitely realized some cost efficiencies. We're able to optimize our resources across the learning and development team. We've reduced duplication, in which case we used to have, different programs by region. Now we have a global programs that can be nuanced just a little bit differently. We've increased our transparency and collaboration across the team and across multiple learning teams as well, but we still do have a common strategic focus. So being a hybrid model has definitely worked for us. But I will tell you there are challenges to this model. And one is there is a continual balance between global and regional. And I'm sure a lot of you face that every day. It's a constant conversation because we are getting needs from so many different places, because we're trying to tailor things on the ground as best as we can without compromising the consistent message. It is a constant conversation. And again, we have multiple requesters, so we have lots of opinions that need to be harmonized. And the handoffs between the team need a lot of clarity. So who should do what? When should the regional consultant respond to something, or when should the global program manager? Those handoffs matter a lot in this type of model. So they just need to be clearly articulated, which is something that we are working on presently. And I'll tell you, if anybody has a solution for this next point, I'm open to hearing suggestions. But because we're a global team, we do have people sitting in the regions, but they're working on global products. But oftentimes they get pulled into regional initiatives. It happens all the time. And the way that we're trying to solve this is by being very transparent, again, about our process and how we prioritize things and what we own and what we don't and what we support and what we don't. So we try very hard to say, if we don't have the resources, that we can't help you now, but here's a playbook you could use, or we can't help you now, but maybe we have room on our docket list, if you will, for the things that might be worked on the side, and we can squeeze you in June. So this is the way that we've been trying to work with regions when our primary focus is global programs. And I will say this does take a lot of collaboration, which on the one side you'll see is a benefit because it is. But sometimes lots of collaboration can increase our time to market. It just happens. The more people involved, the more opinions that are heard, it can take longer time. Now, this is, however, I would say been a cultural decision for us. We are a very collaborative culture. And I firmly believe that people support what they create. And so taking more time to ensure that collaboration actually matters a lot within this model. But it's just a point that we have accepted, and we just kind of manage our project plans very closely. And actually with that, I'm going to focus just on one more item. So hopefully in the next 5 minutes, we can turn it to questions. But the other item that we have focused on is rigor in our programs in terms of how we prioritize, how we take requests in, how we manage our projects. And I'm certainly not going to review all 6 toll gates here that you see on the screen, but this is our process for how we take in ideas, how we mature them with a business case, how we initiate them with a project charter, how we scope them, how we manage them, and how we close them. And this level of rigor, I will tell you, has helped us stay on task. And what you'll see, though, with each one of these toll gates, there's a document associated with each one. So if there's an idea that's come in, and again, these things come in from many different ways, there must be a concept document that explains that idea, that articulates the business value about it. And then the leadership team decides what's listed under the considerations here. You know, is this something that's an immediate need for the organization? Is it part of our existing plan? Honestly, is it an executive request? Because we get those as well, and we need to pay attention to those. Or is this something that's a real quick, simple thing that we just need to maintain something or tweak something, in which case that can go to our docket list. And then we need to have a decision. But we very thoughtfully move our ideas and our requests through this process because this has helped us stay on task. It's also helped us manage our resources and plan for capacity, which is something that we've improved a lot on. So again, I'm not going to focus on a ton of detail around that, but this, for example, is just how our project charter looks. Every single project we have has a charter. It states the business problem. It reviews the goals. We articulate the deliverables. We note who the sponsor is. We talk about risks and assumptions, and we put our high-level milestones here. So every single project we create, whether it's a management training program, whether it's that mentoring program I mentioned, whether it's replacing our organizational competencies, which is something else we're working on, they all have a charter so that we have a common understanding with our sponsor, with our project team, with our own leaders, even within HR, what it is we're working on and what the outcome is supposed to be. And then following along with that, again, I'm not going to review all of these artifacts that we create. And I'll be honest, we're not following the PMBOK model, to the letter, but we do have a couple of things that we require for all of our projects. Aside from the charter, we at least need a task list. We at least need a plan of some kind. RACI charts, as I mentioned, in our complex matrix environment with our customers, with our learning teams across the company, these RACI charts become absolutely critical to knowing who we involve, how we involve them, when we involve them. And then a communication plan. No matter what we're releasing, sometimes there's a behavior change that's included in that. And so we need to make sure that we market what we have and that we're communicating and managing change effectively when we roll out a new product or a new service. And so these are really some of the things that we have put in place, and we've been pretty transparent with the business about how we make these decisions. So this process and documentation has really helped us be able to crystallize what we're doing, stay in scope, which can be very challenging, and kind of stay on task. So with that, just a quick recap, within this matrix environment, we're balancing global and regional and business units. We're a decentralized learning structure. We've kind of focused in 4 different areas to help us navigate this and take ownership where we should and provide great solutions to our employees. That 4-quadrant model really helped us decide what had to be global. We established a governance model that kind of aligns to our learning teams, and that really helps us stay focused on what's relevant and what we should own. We realigned our staff not to be regional or global, but to be both. And really that hybrid model has helped us stay close to the business. And then finally, we instituted that project process with standard project management artifacts that have kept us on scope. And that rigor has really been necessary to manage our resources as well, to help us determine what else can we take on. We have a lot that we're managing with a small team, but the more that we know our resources and our capacity, the more that we're able to help the business achieve what they would like. So with that, Alec, I think we're ready to open it up for questions.
All right, Casey, thank you for that. If you have a question for Casey, just type it in the Q&A icon on the right-hand side of your screen and click submit. We do have quite a few in the queue already, though, Casey, so we're going to get started on these.
Okay.
We're going to go to one from Umberto. The question is, how do you integrate online initiatives? Is that a global or local? Is that at a global or local level, or both? And are there any language barriers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we do offer online learning. That's honestly our primary way for global programs. It does help us achieve scale, but our business unit teams are also embracing online learning technology as well. And actually, we kind of act as a center of expertise, if you will, within the learning and development organization, and that we work with those business unit teams because they do tend to be more on the subject matter expert side than being an e-learning developer, for example. So we can provide them, training and templates and tools to use so that they can also move some of their learning to self-paced. Because honestly, that's just a reality where we can't be in the classroom probably as much as we'd like. So, yep, online learning is absolutely part of all of our strategies, whether they're local or global.
Okay, moving along to the next one from Jennifer. The question is, when you made the shift to the hybrid model, did you add staff for the regions or just shift some from global staff to the regions?
Yeah, great question. We did both, actually. We were fortunate in that, our senior leaders are very committed to developing our employees. And so we were able to add a couple of headcount. But what I will tell you is we have 3 regional leads, one for North America, one for EMEA, and one for APAC. They do have dual jobs. So while they lead the region, they also have additional responsibilities. So for example, our head of EMEA certainly leads that region, and the facilitators report to him and the administrators report to him regionally. But he also runs a lot of our global operations processes. So our 3 regional leads do have a global job as well as being the regional lead. And that's a bit about how we kind of maximized our model. But it also keeps them tied into the global picture. So it's kind of been a win-win, I would say.
Okay, I'm going to try to knock out a couple here with this one. Okay. We had a question come in from a couple of people asking about leadership and leadership buy-in. So first one was, what kind of ROI method do you use to justify your team? And the other is, do all projects, regardless of scale, go to leadership team for decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me take the second part first. So does everything go to the leadership team? Everything does not go to the leadership team. If we have broad priorities that are agreed to by that executive council. So for example, we are investing a lot into our people managers today. That is a critical role for us, as I'm sure it is for you. So that requires a business case and, quite frankly, a lot of funding. And so anything that is a big ticket item or a very large global item does go to that council. But there are other things we do, like, for example, the mentoring program I mentioned. It is global in nature, so they are aware of it. But what we do and how we approach it is something that, we have decided among ourselves, working with our business unit learning leaders, if you will. So, we kind of use them as a sounding board for some of the global programs we do, but it's not a high cost initiative. So it doesn't really go to our executive council for, a thumbs up or a thumbs down, so to speak. But in terms of ROI, that's always a tough one. what we try to do and what we are doing is, as a talent management organization, so learning and development is part of talent management, so is organizational effectiveness, and so is talent planning. These are kind of the three prongs of talent management. We are creating a scorecard of sorts where we are deciding upon the high level metrics that we want to share with our leaders, and they're certainly indicating that to us as well. So we do tend to try and tie things to engagement, to career mobility, promotability, and as I mentioned, engagement, retention, and we quantify, what that means to the business. So oftentimes those are the metrics that we are trying to measure against. When and if we can tie it to business, great. We've tried to do that in the client service space, where we've tried to tie into client satisfaction surveys and the like, and we've had some success with that. But honestly, we try to tie it to talent metrics, and then those metrics can be quantified in terms of cost of turnover and the like. So that's what we try to share with our leaders in terms of what success that we're trying to achieve.
All right, Casey, thank you. We're going to move on, and again, I'm going to try to knock out a couple. This question from Cameron is kind of the same that I've had from a few people pop in here. The question is the courses or content developed outsourced, centrally developed, or locally developed?
Yeah, that's a good question too, and it's all of the above, actually. So part of when we were deciding, our priorities are defined, and then we talk about the approach, and then we talk about how are we going to design and develop the courses. We do have a global team within our L&D team in HR that is dedicated to e-learning development and instructional design. So for those things that are very Northern Trust specific, either culturally or process-wise, we do tend to develop those in-house. So a lot of the business unit learning teams do have their instructors develop content as well, because it's very specific. And to hire a consultant to come in and do that, gosh, it would just take too long to ramp them up on some of our knowledge. But for some professional skills, like communication or managing through change or how to build relationships, I mean, a lot of these things are self-paced, but we do have some things that are outsourced to vendors to either develop or to actually deliver for us if the business tells us that they would really like an instructor-led component. So it really depends on, is it proprietary or is it general? And that kind of helps us make a decision about, do we develop this internally or do we outsource this?
All right. I think we're going to have time for one more, and this last one is going to come from Robert. The question is, what is the motivation that keeps the learning leaders aligned, and what role does the L&D executive council play in keeping these things on track?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, and probably a detail I did not mention. So, I'll tell you, it has been a journey with the learning leaders. I mean, we do have disparate needs. We have disparate sponsors sometimes. Most of the time our needs align, sometimes they don't. I think the motivation for us to work together is that, there is some benefit that the business unit teams derive from working with the global team, just to be plain about it. The platform has been a huge benefit to them. Being able to work with us on best practices for learning has been a benefit to them. But honestly, just keeping the employee front and center and realizing that, gosh, if we had 5 different management programs, that's extremely confusing for our employees. And they're not going to know where to go, and they don't know which one to take. So we really do have skin in the game, all of us, to make the experience as great as possible. And the other facet that I believe he mentioned in his question is the executive council. So that executive council does steer our global programs, but where we're trying to nudge that group is to look at learning across the organization, and that is inclusive of our business unit programs. So we'd like to get them talking better as well to help us maybe set priorities across the company, and then we can figure out how do we divvy up the work. So that is something that we are working on. But I'll tell you, if we just keep cost and experience in mind, which we do, and try to make the best experience for the employee, that really is what keeps the learning leaders together as a council. So that's kind of been a nice benefit, I would say. And we learn from each other, and we say, gosh, we didn't know you had that request. I've had this request over here. So why are we going to work on it in silos? Maybe we could work on it together, and maybe it could be a better solution. So that's helped us stay connected. But I do think we all have a stake in the game to create a cost efficient yet really meaningful experience for our employees.
All right. Thank you so much, Casey. That's going to be all the time we have for today. But I want to thank you again, Casey, for that. We had a ton of questions that come in that we were not able to get to them all. But I want to thank you for the presentation. I want to thank all the attendees for their participation in today's event. And I want to thank today's sponsors of the Spotlight webinar at Cornerstone On Demand. So thanks again to everybody on the line. We'll see everybody back here for our next CLO webinar, which will actually take place in April, on Wednesday, April 4th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. That's titled Building Our Bench and Securing Our Future, Ameriprise Financial's Journey into High Potential Development. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great day.